Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. I hope you're here just to enjoy Show Me the Money, Understanding Title Allocation. So I'll just start off by saying many times we get questions about your Title I allocations. And so we hope that today's session will be informative to you to give you some insight on what goes into the district allocations that you receive every year. So we're going to start off by looking back in the past, which is your current allocation, and then we'll go from there into moving into FY26. So today, we're going to just talk about the fact that, of course, you have your allocations now, obviously, and we just want to make sure that you know that there's not going to be any additional changes to the money. I think we've said that earlier. Those of you who've been in the session with Jennifer Rhodes, she's also talked about the fact that where we stand with our funding, it is final. We're not giving out additional funds as of this moment. So what you're working with is what you have now. Moving on, some of our common questions that we get. The first one, can a district determine its allocation if it knows its poverty and enrollment data? You know, that's one of the main things people look at and say, that's all there is to it. And as we get into the presentation, you're going to know a little bit more about what goes into making your allocations. But the answer to that is no. Just knowing those two data points is not enough. And then another question we get often, you look at that long list of district allocations and you say, well, I have a similar demographic to this district. Why aren't our allocations the same, or why is that district's allocation more than ours? Well, you know, those allocations are based off of a formula, and there are four different pockets of money that we will talk about as we get deeper into this presentation. That's going to help you understand that a little better. So, what we do know now, looking ahead for next year, the continuing resolution did pass. So we do know that we're going to be level funded for the upcoming school year. So what that means is we should expect as a state to receive about the same amount of money. That's all we can say right now about where we stand with allocations. What does that mean for you as a district? Well, all of the factors that go into building your allocation will still play an important role. So just because you received $10 million for this current year does not guarantee you'll receive the exact same $10 million for 26. Level funding does not equate to you receiving the exact same funding that you did in the previous year. So earlier in March, not March, it went out before that. You received a letter asking you to look at your census data information and make sure that all of that looked correct to you. You had a protest period where you could have reported back saying that you had an issue with what that census data was. That challenge period closed on March 17th. That was an important time frame to report any issues with your census data, because that is part of what goes into determining what your funding buckets will be. So let's talk about the data that's used to determine your preliminary allocations. So the U.S. Department of Ed will use the state per pupil expenditures, and then of course they will also use data from the state to help calculate what the 26 allocations are. The preliminary Title I allocations will differ from the 25 allocations due to the new census data. So keep some of that in mind. I want that to trigger a warning bell to you that things may look a little different for you in 26. For some of you, it may look better. For some of you, maybe not. One of the rules of thumb that we always tell districts in planning for the future, always plan based on having a decrease in funding, right? You can always add money, but it's very hard to move forward when you have banked on having a set amount of funding and it be far under that. So always bank on, my conservative amount is 10%. So whatever you have right now, bank on a 10% reduction to be safe as you're planning for the upcoming year. So the data that we use to determine 26 allocations for Title 1B and D, well, you don't worry about B, but you worry about Title 1 Part D, that's our N and D. We look at, for Title 1D, Subpart 1, the state agency counts that are submitted by the department, the SEAs. And then we also look at the state data used in Title I allocations. So your state education agencies and the Title I allocations. Title I Part D, what we look for there, your October counts for our children who are in locally operated institutions for delinquent children. And then, of course, we also look at other data using Title I. So that part, we'll talk about hold harmless there. For Title II and Title IV Part B and EHCY, for Title II, what we're looking for here are your ages 5 to 17 state poverty data that we also use for Title I. With Title IV, we use your previous Title I allocation without the application of the hold harmless provision. And then for EHCY, what we're looking at there would be your current fiscal year's Title I Part A allocations without the application of the hold harmless from the previous year. So what do we do first? We're gathering all of that data, okay? So we're trying to collect all of the census poverty data, and a lot of this comes to us straight from Washington. So just so you know, we're not just asking you for information. We're getting this straight from Washington to plug into the formula that Sheree will be talking about in just a moment. Okay, so included in that, we'll also look at non-census data, which includes our neglected children. That's reported by the State Department, by the state. And then we're also looking at children ages 5 through 17 in families above the poverty, receiving temporary assistance, that TANF information, and of course in our foster home reports. And then, of course, the state determined Title I allocation under each formula for the prior year. So step 2 with that for us is, of course, Sheree gets all of this information and she starts loading it in her district. We have your census poverty data. We look at children that would be in the neglected subgroup, foster care, TANF, and then we add, of course, all those children together, to give us the census total number of children ages 5 through 17 that are served in your district. And of course, we determine the percentage formula for that, and you'll see here just an example of what this looks like. This is starting to show you how you are starting to differ from other districts and what different pieces, not just knowing, okay, we have this enrollment, but you have subgroups that are starting to help determine your allocation. Okay,
Good afternoon again. My name's Sheree Mosley, and I'm responsible for keying all of the data for allocations for Title I, Title II, Title IV, Title V, and N&D. And so I talked about this briefly in our last session about the four pots of funding. We have a basic grant, we have a concentration grants, and then we have our targeted and EFIG grant. And so all of this information is determined by the U.S. Department of Education. So when they send the information into our office, we have this huge spreadsheet. So you saw in the previous slide that Jewel showed, that is actually a part of what our spreadsheet looks like. But just think of it being the 70 plus districts that I have. So I'm keying that data for every district in the state. And oftentimes with this, we may have a district that called and said, well, I don't understand why my allocation went down. This will be the first place that I look. I'll go back to this spreadsheet. I will look at these four eligibility groups, and I will compare them to what it looked like last year. And most times, this is where the differentiation is coming from. Not necessarily something that we've done in our office, but just going back to whether it's your census data, your poverty data, I go back to this to pull what that differentiation may be between the 2 years as to why your allocation may have increased or decreased, because I get the question both ways. And so for the basic and the concentration, all of them have their own criteria. LEA must have at least 10 formula children, and the number of those children must exceed 2%. For your concentration, the eligibility for that, they must meet the basic criteria for the basic grant formula, but they must not exceed 6,500 children, or 15%. And then for the targeted, they must meet the basic, but then must also 10 or equal or exceed 5% of LEA's total population through the 5 to 17 age group. Okay, so here we have estimating the 26 allocations. So eligibility under each formula. So as we were just talking about in the previous slide, so once we have keyed all this data, the allocation is running its formulas, is running its everything that it's running to compare to see whether a district is going to be eligible for a specific group. So once it's done all of that, it's saying, well, use for instance LEA number 1. Eligible for basic grants, yes. Concentration, yes. EFIG and targeted, yes. But then as you go down, you'll see some districts, who may not have as many total number of formula students, or their percentage is lower. You'll see that some of them may not qualify for the eligibility of those groups, but it just depends on what the numbers look like for your specific district. All right, so estimating the minimum FY26 allocations, the review of performance provision. Again, this is something that is built into this worksheet. And when we speak of this worksheet, this isn't necessarily a worksheet that was, we kind of built it, at the state office. But prior to me getting to the state office, formerly my team lead, Drew, and I believe it was Karen Cook at the time when she was here, this has been vetted by the U.S. Department of Education. It has been vetted. They went up there to make sure that everything was calculating the way that it's supposed to be calculating. And so as you see here where it talks about this whole harmless, pretty much what this is, it helps ensure that a district that does not receive quote unquote a certain, it keeps them at a certain range based on what they received last year, so they can't drop but so low. So here you will see 95% for LEAs with a formula rate that is equal to or greater than 30%. So what that means is that your FY quote unquote 26 allocation will not drop below 95%. The same for the 90% for LEA's formula child rate that is equal to or greater than 15%. And that way, it'll show that your allocation for FY26 won't drop below 90% than what you had the previous year, and so on for 85%. So if an LEA is not eligible under the basic, targeted, or EFIG grants, these hold harmlesses do not apply. However, if an LEA is not eligible to receive concentration grants in that current year, but was eligible at least once in the previous 4 years, then the hold harmless provision would apply. I know that's a lot.
I need to pause.
Y'all give up?
High respect for you, sure.
Like I was telling these young ladies at the table up here, I've been doing this for over 5 years now. And when allocation season comes around, I still pucker up. Because it's a lot. It's a lot. All right. All right. And so here is just to give you an example of what it could possibly look like. So looking at your LEA 1 for 2024, this is just an example. It shows that they have 95% across the board. So which means is that, say for instance, if their allocation is a little lower, it'll make sure that in their 26 allocation, it'll keep them at that 95% threshold. So it wouldn't be a situation where you got a certain amount of money this year, and then the new year you have this drastic drop. So it'll kind of keep you at a base where you'll still be able to function. And the same, as you can see, and it goes on, it just compares. You have one there that says 85%, and they weren't eligible for the whole harmless for concentration, but then they were for EFIG and targeted. All right, step 5, allocation under each formula. At this stage, it says whole harmless estimates from the prior slide to the estimates of the minimum allocations that each LEA may receive for budget or planning purposes. To further refine the estimates, the state may find it helpful. You may try to estimate it, but sometimes we don't necessarily know what the actual bottom line number will be until we get it. So when you are moving from your preliminary allocation to your final allocations, I had a district asked me, well, in December when I left, we had a certain amount of money. And then when I came back in January, I had more money. Where did this money come from? And so what you have at preliminary, just think of it as your planning phase. Because when your final allocations come out, we don't know what final allocations may be. You may take a dip. We just wouldn't know that until we actually get the funding. All right, and so this is another worksheet that we received from the U.S. Department of Education, and it pretty much just compares what the previous year's allocation was to what the district were receiving in the current year. So you see, it has the FY25 state determined for basic concentration, targeting in your EFIG grant, and then you see your estimated basic grant for FY26. So you see for LEA 1 in their basic grant, they have $550,000, but then estimated for FY26 is $522,000. So you can say, well, why did it go down? So like I said earlier, when you receive that decrease in funding, this is going to be the first place that I check. Before I check your poverty, before I check your census count, I'm going to go back to that U.S. Department of Ed and see if you received a decrease in either one of those fundings that you were eligible for. All right, so determining funding for state N&D sites and charter. So as far as the N&D sites, they report to us what their accounts are. Makisha, who's new to the team, she is the state coordinator for N&D. So once she's done everything on her end, then she provides me with the count for the state facilities. Because that allocation, Title I, that allocation is based off of the Title I allocation. So I have to use whatever the worksheet has calculated for N&D, I have to use that to calculate the N&D allocation. And so pretty much the districts provide the facility count to our office. As I said, Title I party allocations are used to determine the funding for N&D. The counts, along with formula counts, are used to determine the per pupil amount, and the per pupil amount is then used to formulate the final allocation for each N&D site. And then as far as for the charter districts, how that works, because they're not your traditional districts, pretty much at preliminary allocations, we're using the previous year 135th day count for the charter school districts. And then once we get the final allocations, and then the charter school districts provide me with whatever their current counts are for the year before we finalize the allocations. All right, so let's talk a little bit about state set-asides. So we need to be able to not only run the grant, but we need to be able to function the grant. There are things, administrative needs that are required. So for Title I, Title II, and Title IV, there's a 1% cap. Probably over the last couple of years, the 1% is the max. We don't always take the 1%. So sometimes we may take a portion of that, and then whatever is left, we push it out to the district. And so what that means is that that's more money that's going out to you guys. So we don't always take that full 1% on our administration costs. The same for school improvement. The way school improvement works is it pulls, once the calculation has ran, it pulls off of the districts that have received an increase in their allocation. If the district did not receive an increase in their allocation from the previous year, school improvement is not pulled off of that. Hence why there's a 7% cap. So over the last couple of years, we have not drawn the full 7%. Sometimes it may be 3%, 4%. But we don't always pull that full cap, that full 7% cap. And then for Title II, they have other activities, leader preparation academy, other state activities that's capped at 2%. And then Title V, state admin is capped at 3%. I know. Questions?
There has to be a question. I knew this, but I don't think it ever struck me like it struck me watching your slides today. So I think all ESSA grants are based on students age 5 to 17. But when we pull enrollment counts, we're not pulling by age. And so is there a deviation in the formula that kind of accounts for the fact that I'm sure I've got IDEA students over the age of 17 in my high school? I mean, I always have taken out the pre-K numbers, but I've never thought about the age requirement itself and how that factors in our enrollment count. Have I done it wrong already? 25 years ago?
No, you've done it right. I mean, just think about it. You mentioned pre-K for an example. We've always talked about Title I funding can serve from birth, really, through graduation. Very few districts have ever tried to dip below maybe 3K enrollments, right? Because the more you add to what you want to do, the smaller the pie seems to get with the work that you can do, right? So when you talk about adding or having your 18-year-olds, that doesn't go into our formula, as you see, but the work is still there for those students, and they still qualify to receive those services. We're just not funding it. Just like we're not funding, we are funding the services. We're not getting money for those populations. Our 3-year-olds, we don't get money for those, but we still serve them. Same as with 4s, same with, like you said, your 18, 19, 20-year-olds who are in IDA programs but are at your schools. Sure, there's some more questions because we get them all the time.
Yeah,
we get their dip.
We get them all the time, and just say, for instance, usually we've learned over the years, U.S. Department of Ed, they will send, hey, this is your FY, for hypothetical FY 26 allocations. You can go ahead and start keying your data and all this other stuff that I have to do. And then 4 weeks later, sorry, here's a revision. So then I have to start from scratch again. And so just think about it. The examples that I have, and they had maybe 6 LEAs. I'm doing that for I'm keying that data for every district for basic, concentration, targeted, and EFIG. I know they send the file to us, so I'm not sure if it's something that I haven't seen them posted anywhere here.
They don't post it, and until they say we can post that data, we won't post it.
Questioned it, you could walk.
Yeah, if you
Definitely.
yes, I've had districts that say for instance took a decrease, say for instance $40,000. That may have been somebody's salary, that may have been a program that they wanted to fund, and now they can't fund that program. So then they have their superintendent and federal programs director. We didn't have them come to the office. We need to sit down and find out what has happened. So I am able to go back to what U.S. Department of Education has sent me, and I am able to, with a fine-tooth comb, be able to show you what this is what U.S. Department of Education had you listed at in FY 25. Well, here now in FY 26, this is where you are in your for-profit funding. And so, in looking at those numbers, that district could have very well taken a decrease. And then once we look through that, then I can kind of move forward and say, well, let's go and look at your formula children, your 5 through 17. Let's go and look through your pupils in poverty. Your pupils in poverty student count could have decreased. There's just so many different variations as to what could have caused a district to receive an increase or a decrease. But I'm more than willing, if a district has that question, I'm more than willing to go through that with them.
You mentioned earlier that you're expecting the state to have about the same, the South Carolina state have the same allocation.
Right. So let's make sure we understand the difference between what I just said with we're expecting level funding. Remember the fiscal years that she was showing us was the federal fiscal year. So she's moving a year beyond that. So we are expecting level funding for the upcoming year. We're not looking at a cut for Title II or Title III, like that slide that you said. Our 27, that's when it becomes the tricky thing for us. None of us in this room, that was for the upcoming 27 year. Right now, we're okay. So there's no need for mass panic now. Next year, we'll see. Yes. This is before the craziness of what's going on has happened. We have suggested that you prepare for a 10% decrease. This is going to look at it from multiple ways. One, the state may get a decrease, which automatically reduces what some districts will see. The state may get the same money, or it may get more. But the way your district is affected, it counts what you have with your poverty levels that Sheree has talked about, and how that may be in your census data, and how it affects each one of those 4 funding sources. Okay, and then of course what we take off if there's hold harmless in play or not. And then of course from that, what our district, state set-asides are. So all of those moving parts play a role in whether or not you see any change in your funding, which every single district in here has seen their funding go up a little bit or down a little bit. Most of the time it remains steady, but there are some years where a district seems to take a hit more so in previous years. So that's why we tell you, always err on the conservative side and just plan on having a 10% cut. You would much rather go to your superintendent and say, look, we've had a boom. We have an additional $100,000 that we weren't counting on versus we need to find other funds to cover this program or pay for this teacher. Okay, it just helps you with planning.
So if we receive the additional allocation for the final allocation, do you be conservative off the total, including the final allocation, or before you got the additional final allocation?
Well, I would base it off of the final. Some people in here may be more conservative and think about what they got at preliminary and base it off of that. I would look at the trends that have been happening in your district to really help guide that. Some of my folks here who've been doing this for more than 2 or 3 years, and you've been able to look at your data, what do? Do you look at the preliminary, or would you look at your final to help you decide whether you would look at that 10% reduction? Which would you look at?
In the past, we've looked at our preliminary, but over the years, only a couple $100 difference, and we get millions in our district. So we feel very comfortable when we do get them a preliminary.
Okay. I worked on the final, and last year Berkeley took a big hit, so my final is more conservative than my preliminary one. We tell our schools you start planning in February, so we'll start with 15% less in February, and by next week I should have their 135 accounts. And then we do a planning budget, which might go up or down based on their numbers. And then we wait for our preliminary reel from y'all, and we go from there. And then in October we do it again.
But you always have been great, because last year you prepared us all. Every meeting you kept telling us last year that we were going to take a hit. So when we did receive a preliminary, it was a hit. So we could work from there. But we have already told all of our stakeholders in our district, just in case. So we're trying to forecast, and we're preparing all our principals, administration, and superintendent of the possibilities.
And I think that's a safe place to be. Because if you go and you compare what 24 was like what 285 million, the base, but for FY25 final, it came in at $279 million. And I had districts calling in, well, why did my allocation go down? Well, the state took nearly a $5 million decrease. And so it's going to affect, the state across the board.
We don't use new census data every year, right? When was the last year we used?
Yeah, we use it every year. Yes. Any other questions?
On a couple slides, we've
been talking about, I always consider Title IV Part A, but I've seen on a couple of slides Title IV B. What's the difference? And is A okay? This presentation is all about B. But
B, some of you also deal with B, and so we just shared all of that. Just because it's no, no, sorry. Because remember, your Title IV is based off of Title I.
The previous year's Title I.
Title I. So yeah,
Like 1003 money,
that was
we call 1003.
your school improvement money. ESSA, yeah.
Because priority is state funding.
Yes, priority is state. We have ATSI and CSI in that 1003. But then you also have priority funds, which, like you said, with the state funds. We hope that you now understand what goes into making your allocation what it is from year to year. It's not a magic wand that we wave or we say, like, this district over another, we're giving you an extra pot of money. That's not how it works. It is all formula. And I've had people say, can you give us a little more? We can't give any more. That's not how it works if you ask nicely. So it's all based on the formula. And it's something that we check often, and we double check our formulas when we can. If we think that something's off, we will definitely go back to Washington and sit with Todd Stevenson, who is the guru of all things allocations, formulas, and he will work with us. But if you ever have a question as it relates to your formula funding, how it's determined, you can reach out to us. We'll talk you through it. We'll explain your increases or your decreases to you, because many of you do report to a board and they want to know the status of the funding. So feel free to reach out to us.
And I do get those questions often. Hey, Sheree, we got a board meeting tonight, and I need to be able to report on my allocation. So I get those questions. So again, feel free to give me a call, and I'll be more than happy to help you.
Hopefully you reach out to her before the day of board meeting.
Right.
But I